Hi, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and welcome to my report cards for Bloomburrow. In this series, I review every mythic rare from the set and give them a letter grade based on how mythic they feel, how unique the design is, and the creative deck building opportunities it provides. In this video, I'll be wrapping up my reviews with the 6 mythic rares that I couldn't come up with a clever category for. Just as a disclaimer, I'm not a professional, and these are my personal opinions based on my experience as a casual Commander player. I have the utmost respect for everyone over at Wizards of the Coast for all the hard work and creativity they put into these fantastic designs. With that out of the way, I hope I earn a like and subscribe from you by the end of the video, and without further ado, on to the review. Our first card to review may have a bit of a joke for a name, but have you seen his weapon? It also looks pretty ridiculous, actually.
Byrke, Long Ear of the Law. For 1 green, 1 white, and 4 generic, you get a 4/4 legendary rabbit soldier with vigilance. When Byrke, Long Ear of the Law enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So what you're getting here is Byrke as a 5/5, since you'll likely want to give him a counter to take advantage of his vigilance on future turns. Plus, putting a counter on a creature that's ready to attack this turn and double that counter, effectively giving it +2/+2. The following turn, Byrke can attack as a 6/6, and your other creature will boast 4 +1/+1 counters. That's a respectable amount of stat production, which will continue to compound turn over turn. The design certainly suits green-white, and is actually quite similar to a recent mythic from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, which provides an interesting contrast, revealing how adding or subtracting to the mana value alters this effect. And it is an incredibly powerful effect, easily supplemented by a host of options in these colors. Funnily enough, I think the strength of this card is somewhat undercut by its trigger adding a counter to 2 targets. Because that isn't very good on its own, I think it reads in a way that detracts from how powerful this card actually is. At least, that was my first reaction when looking this card over. There are a lot of amusing inclusions Byrke encourages, such as 0/0 creatures that enter with counters, making them cheap to cast and quick to grow, and others that have effects that scale with their power and toughness. Or he could easily slot into other multicolored decks that want to dump heaps of counters onto their creatures. At 6 mana, this may not be as desirable to a lot of players, but I like how the design of this card means your creatures can start growing the same turn it comes down. Byrke may not break much new ground, but it's fairly designed and, as rabbits tend to do, will cause your counters to multiply rapidly. Grade B.
What do you know? Another wascally wabbit.
Warleader. For 2 white and 2 generic, you get a 4/4 Rabbit Knight with Offspring 2. You may pay an additional 2 generic as you cast this spell. If you do, when the creature enters, create a 1/1 token that's a copy of it. Warleader also says, whenever you attack, choose one. Create a 1/1 white rabbit creature token that's tapped and attacking, or attacking creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. Offspring is the only new mechanic to be featured on a mythic rare, and I'm not exactly thrilled. I like what this card is offering. It has an attack trigger like our buddy Byrke, so that's a neat tie-in, and being able to double up on the trigger with your Offspring is a fun use of the new mechanic. But these triggers are kind of pitiful, no? For 4 mana, you make a vanilla 1/1 every time you attack, and for 6 mana, you can get 2. There are a litany of cards that make tokens when they or you attack, and they tend to either make significantly more than 1 or 2 tokens, or have additional bonuses on top of that. So the first option on Warleader's trigger is pretty disappointing. Option number 2 is 4 mana to give all your attacking creatures +1/+1, or 6 mana to give them +2/+2. That can be a fairly substantial bonus, putting out a lot of extra damage and making your creatures much tougher to block. But white as a color is swimming in team pump effects and anthems, which cost less and work on both offense and defense. These bonuses are fine, but what about them sizzles with mythic potential? If anything, you're paying more mana for less output, and other than showcasing the new mechanic, this card brings nothing new. I don't see a reason to get excited for this card outside of a dedicated rabbit deck, and even then, I think you could do better. Grade F.
Even the cutesy critter set has to include the customary mythic red dragon.
Dragonhawk, Fate's Tempest. For 2 red and 3 generic, you get a 5/5 legendary bird dragon with flying. Whenever Dragonhawk enters or attacks, exile the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. You may play those cards until your next end step. At the beginning of your next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. Cost and stats are about what you'd expect, so nothing special there. What is special is Dragonhawk impulse drawing you at least one card whenever it enters or attacks. The opportunity to see more cards based on the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater is fantastic. In my mind, this is a green-centric space, but Wizards has clearly been pushing red into this territory, and I think that's a terrific choice. The designers have also been exploring getting value out of cards that you put into exile, but either don't get to or don't choose to use. It can feel bad to permanently remove your own cards from the game, so I think giving a small payoff helps not only mitigate that negative experience, it also opens up the notion of purposely leaving cards exiled. There's great risk-reward potential that gives players a chance to make engaging choices, and that is excellent work by the design team. I also like how this card harkens back to a similar design, but explores that space further. Instead of checking for lands, it checks for 4 powered creatures. And instead of 1 damage per card, it amps up to 2, which may not sound like much of a jump, but I think it will prove noticeably dangerous in play. I criticize a lot of designs for being too similar to older cards, especially at lower rarities. Dragonhawk is guilty of that to some extent, but I think it turns the knobs in the right ways to not feel derivative. Instead, it's fresh enough to be exciting, and builds on the foundation of what came before in satisfying ways. Grade B.
We all have that one relative who likes to give those crushing hugs, right?
Hugs, Grisly Guardian. For 2 green, 2 red, and X generic, you get a 5/5 legendary Badger Warrior with Trample. When Hugs, Grisly Guardian enters, exile the top X cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards, and you may play an additional land on each of your turns. There are several comparable creatures that grant an additional land drop per turn, so my initial instinct was to stack them up against Hugs. Considering how much colored mana he needs, you aren't getting much of an upgrade, especially since these are rare creatures versus a mythic rare. Since you aren't getting a significantly more powerful creature, the 4 colored mana and mythic status bring an impulse of X to the table. While I certainly like that ability a lot, it too has existed for a long time, and at a better rate, and again at a lower rarity. Still, for being an X spell, Hugs is a good play early in the game and late, which is valuable flexibility. But in my opinion, while this card is overall pretty good, it simply doesn't go far enough to distinguish itself as a mythic. And I feel like there's a missed opportunity to connect the name of the card to its function. I'm not sure the expression Badger Hug is going to be commonplace, and unfortunately, Hugs himself seems equally forgettable. Grade C.
Hopping right along, we come to
Glarb, Calamity's Augur. For 1 black, 1 green, and 1 blue, you get a 2/4 legendary frog wizard noble with Death Touch. Glarb says you may look at the top card of your library anytime, and you may play lands and cast spells with mana value 4 or greater from the top of your library. You can tap Glarb to surveil too. 3 mana mythic legendary creatures are really the sweet spot for designs these days, and a 2/4 with Death Touch is a good combination. 4 toughness means it's likely going to take 2 creatures to defeat in combat, and 2 power means Glarb will take down the 2 best creatures blocking him. Of course, I'd be a little surprised if Glarb goes on offense much, but he should provide solid defense. Being able to play lands off the top of your deck is deceptively valuable. It can help you reduce the number of turns where you might miss playing a land, and effectively acts as drawing cards whenever you can take advantage of it. Surveilling 2 goes even further towards ensuring you find every land you could desire, or maybe clearing out veins of unwanted mana and spells. There are about a dozen other cards that let you play any card or subset of cards off the top of your library, so this is an effect that is becoming more common, and they tend to be at regular rarity, rising to mythic level mostly in supplemental designs. Aside from giving you a 3-color legend to build this style of deck around, I'm not convinced Glarb does enough to be mythic certified, but I love when players are given certain limitations to work around, and Glarb encourages that handsomely. There are plenty of spells that have built-in cost reduction, so their values are high, but you won't be paying full price. Ultimately, this isn't an entirely fresh take on the ability to play off the top of your library, and I'd like to see a little more innovation here. But it does have enough to pique interest about the possibilities, and presents quite a bit of value in the process. Or you could just make a frog-themed deck. Glarb, Calamity's Augur, scores a B.
And our final review is another 3-mana legendary frog that cares about 4s.
Helga, Skittish Seer. For 1 green, 1 white, and 1 blue, you get a 1/3 legendary frog druid. Whenever you cast a creature spell with mana value 4 or greater, you draw a card, gain 1 life, and put a +1/+1 counter on Helga, Skittish Seer. And you can tap Helga to add X mana of any one color, where X is her power. Spend this mana only to cast creature spells with mana value 4 or greater, or creature spells with X in their mana costs. I'm not surprised the name Helga made it onto a Magic card, but seeing it on a frog is a bit unexpected. Focusing on the design, wow, does it give you just about everything you could ask for. Gaining life, drawing cards, growing in power. The only element missing is the Simic classic of putting lands into play. As with Glarb, you will certainly want to find ways to pack your deck with 4+ mana creature spells that can be heavily discounted, and others that have workarounds where you can trigger Helga without gumming your hand up with expensive spells. Then again, maybe you can load your deck up with 6-drops. As Helga grows in power, she generates more and more mana. And while it is a small touch, I think including creature spells with X in her mana producing ability is a brilliant design decision. It opens up another branch to explore when building with Helga as your commander, and those are the kinds of spells players would naturally be excited to spend their Frog Druid mana on. Honestly, I feel like Helga is a bit gratuitous. This design probably could be dialed down somewhat and still be exciting to build around. Maybe that's just me being soured by the likes of Tulane, but I do think rewards are more enjoyable when you have to work for them at least a little bit. Personal reservations aside, I have to admit that I think this is a very powerful design that will be loads of fun to build around and play with. It leads right into the type of gameplay a lot of players are excited to experience, but also allows the freedom to explore every 4+ mana creature in Magic's catalog. That's a sensational balance, and I'm not scared to say that Helga, Skittish Seer belongs in the S tier.
And there you have it, my grades for the final 6 mythics from Bloomburrow. Let me know what you think of my assessments, and if you had a clever category I could have grouped them all into. Thanks for watching. I hope I earned a like and subscribe from you, and I'd love it if you'd share this video. If not, thanks for sticking with me this long anyways. You can follow me on X at UnsolicitedMTG for channel updates and other nonsense. And be sure to check back next week for my own custom redesigned unversions of every mythic rare that I graded a C or lower. Once again, I'm Gabe from Unsolicited Designs, and who asked me anyways?